All right, welcome. Today I have with me Jeremy Drobeck from Amerifirst to chat with us about MSHDA loans and some of the common misconceptions that arise when it comes to refinancing or selling a home with a MSHDA loan. Perhaps these misunderstandings come from just a miscommunication on the lender's part or a misunderstanding of the information around the internet or from other real estate agents. So today we're going to get to kind of the root of a common question I hear, and that's, is MSHDA really free money? And so with that said, let's get started. Jeremy, would you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about your experience as a lender.
Sure. Yeah. My name's Jeremy Drobeck with Amerifirst Home Mortgage. If you're interested in looking me up, you can find me at firstclassmortgageservice.com. I've been doing this a long time, so over 20 years. I actually got my roots as a real estate agent and started learning on that, learned from that aspect of the business and got into lending years ago and have been doing it ever since. So I'm one of the top producers here at Amerifirst the last few years, and I just have a passion for everything mortgage and everything real estate.
Perfect. Yeah. So real quick, would you tell us a little bit about, the MSHDA loan program and the MSHDA DPA down payment assistance program for anybody that's not familiar with it?
Yeah, sure. So MSHDA in and of itself is a program through the state of Michigan. And I always like to explain it. It's kind of like an add-on option. It's like when you're buying a car and you upgrade from the cloth seats to the leather. Okay, so it's a program that gets tacked on with other loan programs. And so when we're doing a MSHDA loan, we're still doing either a conventional, an FHA, a VA, or an RD loan, and then we're going to MSHDA with this added option, with this added piece. And there's a couple different programs and nuances, and without getting into all that, basically, most of the time the MSHDA programs utilize buyers utilizing it for the low down payment. And so what MSHDA does is they require the buyer do 1% down, and then they have this pot of money that we're allowed to tap into. And the pot of money varies between zip code. It's either $7,500 or 10 grand. In a lot of the areas in Michigan, there's like 200 and something odd zip codes that are eligible for the $10,000. So if we got that $10,000 pot of money and the buyer needs, let's just simple numbers, right? So let's say the buyer needs 5 grand down. Well, MSHDA is going to let them do 1%. So that's maybe $1,500. And then the rest of the money, we tap into that $10,000 pot and we get the other $3,500 of down payment from that pot of money with MSHDA. The other huge benefit to it is that, and especially in this super competitive market that we're all in and dealing with right now, is the rest of the MSHDA money we can use towards closing costs. So in many cases of MSHDA buyers going in, they're putting an offer in, they're doing low down payment, and they're not having to ask the seller for any closing costs. So it's a super popular program. It's helped put a lot of transactions together in this tough market, and just all the way around a great program for first time and move up buyers to look at.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll add two things to that piggyback on is that, I really like the analogy that you gave. That was probably actually the best analogy I've ever heard, because a lot of people do believe that the MSHDA loan program is like a separate, like loan program itself, as if it's equal to a conventional, rather than understanding that it's an add-on to these other loan types that we're using. And then second, you're absolutely right about the seller's concessions. I think probably for the last like 2 to 3 years at least around, it's been extremely difficult to get any offers accepted when you're asking for seller concessions. And I just remember, 5 years ago, it wasn't uncommon. You could go, even though house values at that time seemed really high and they couldn't get any higher, you could still get an offer accepted even with 3% concessions or, up to 6% concessions in some cases. And now it's like, good luck trying to even get an offer accepted with any of that concession. So thanks for mentioning that and sharing that, because I think it's really important in today's market. So, and so let's dive into kind of the root of the question that a lot of people want to know is this MSHDA, this low down payment assistance or this down payment assistance program that we call MSHDA, is this MSHDA money actually really free? And if not, when does it have to be paid back?
Sure. That's a great question and a big misnomer out there. So Most people that I talk to think it's free money. It's not free. I mean, there's nothing free about it. It is an interest-free loan. So what MSHDA is going to do is they're going to slap a lien on the house for whatever is due. So if we get 10 grand from MSHDA, when we close that loan, MSHDA is going to put a lien on the property. Now it is an interest-free loan. So it's not costing the buyer any money to have it sitting there, but someday, ultimately, when they either refinance or sell the house, MSHDA is getting their money back. And it could be 30 years down the road, but that lien's going to sit there. And when that house sells, MSHDA is getting paid back. Again, interest free. So I don't want to downplay it that it's not a beneficial loan, but for those that think it's free money, it's not free. It gets paid back.
Right. Yeah. And I think I'll add to that too. I think there's the two areas in that why people think it's free is because it is interest free, right? It's not accruing any interest. We're not making any payments towards it while we are living in the house either. And so, right. But it's important to understand that the full amount we have to actually end up paying back. So, and then also, I think if you want to talk about, do you want to mention the program, if you're familiar with the Step Forward program in 2018 when it was forgivable, I believe?
Yeah, there was a point where MSHDA was doing some stuff that was forgivable. And they, MSHDA as a whole, really, they do dive into some other aspects of housing and stuff that I'm not real familiar with, but as far as like assistance and stuff, and that's really what some of the Step Forward stuff was assistance to home buyers out there. And so there was a point, and there was a point where there was some free stuff going on, but that was very limited. And again, 99% of the stuff, or the people watching and stuff that have gotten money from MSHDA, it's going to get paid back. Right. And the part of the problem is, and I've seen this a couple different ways when I've talked to people that have gotten MSHDA loans, and I'm looking at their credit reports and stuff. MSHDA requires that they won't let us service the loan. So we service a lot of our loans, but in the case of a MSHDA, those loans end up getting sold to a different servicer. And over the years, I've seen the servicers report them different on the credit. So I've actually seen where some of the servicers report the full amount. So if it was a $100,000 loan from the lender and another $7,500 from the MSHDA side, they'll report a balance owed of $107,000, but other times I see them not report it. And I think that's the other piece where people get confused is they're looking at the statement they're getting from their lender, and it doesn't always include the MSHDA money. It's just like, and 5 years later when they're selling the house, they don't remember what they did, and that's where you run into problems. And the last thing anybody needs is a surprise at closing where they thought they were getting 20 grand and now they're paying back $10,000 and they're only getting 10 grand. That could totally cause a lot of issues.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So with kind of, I guess, these cons or negatives in a sense, if we have to pay back the MSHDA, or at least so that we're aware of it, why might someone, I guess, wish to refinance a loan, with the down payment assistance, and if the DPA has to be, paid back. So in other words, like, where are options, where it's makes sense to refinance?
Right. Sure. That another great question. So, I mean, we're coming out of right now, I would say for sure, the biggest refi boom I've ever seen. And so, of course, a lot of the people I had worked with when we were doing all these refinances the last 2 years were past customers that I had done MSHDA loans for, and they're calling in, hey, can I save some money on a refinance? And when the loan gets refinanced, MSHDA's got to get paid back. So we can't subordinate the lien like we would if it were an equity line or something like that. MSHDA won't subordinate it. So for me, when I'm analyzing and going through that consultation with the borrower on, is it worth refinancing? Does it make sense? There's a couple things we're looking at. So number one is just the dollars and cents, right? So if somebody took out a MSHDA loan years ago, and I'm totally making this up, but let's say the rate was 6%, and we're not this low anymore, but we were a few months ago where we could get them down to a 3% or something, it may make sense to refi just because we're lowering that rate so much in that example that there's probably going to be some monthly savings and some interest savings, even though when we refinance it, we got to take the MSHDA part and put it in the loan. But it can be done. I mean, we can get it worked in there. It's just if we're adding 10 grand to the balance, that they're going to be paying interest on, it makes it that much harder for those numbers to make sense on a refi. But certainly in cases they do, and it's really a case by case where somebody's got to sit down, because it's a function of how much they owe, what their rate is, if they did an FHA MSHDA that they're paying PMI on. The other thing is, if we're refinancing them to a conventional, maybe we're getting them out of the mortgage insurance. So there's all these factors. And at the end of the day, they got to sit down with a loan officer and just see if it makes sense. I will say there's a lot of cases where I looked at them and it didn't make financial sense to do it. So we simply didn't do it.
Right.
So that's the money side of that question. The other side of that question is a lot of people that refinance, they're taking cash out, right? So most home buyers out there right now, because we've had this drastic market appreciation over the last couple of years, right? What's Wayne County up? Do you know what Wayne County's up?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the areas or parts that you're at, but I've seen anywhere from, in some neighborhoods, like 14% to up to 20+%, and over the year.
Yeah.
So I mean, $200,000 house last year is now potentially 240 or even
240,
higher.
right. So those buyers, if they called they may want to pull some equity out,
right?
And what they're maybe they're taking the money and they're going to Vegas and it's a big trip, right? Or maybe they're doing home renovations and home repairs. Maybe they're consolidating debt with the money. There's all these different reasons people refinance. But on a refinance like that, again, MSHDA is getting paid back on the refinance. So the other part of it is, sometimes when we do those cash out refinances, we may be going up in interest rate, or we may be going up in payment because we're tacking some more money on there or whatever. But it's the question of, what's the money being used for? Is it that important? They got a tarp on the roof and a bucket in the living room catching the water. They're probably going to want to refinance. That's an emergency.
Right.
Regardless of whether we got to pay MSHDA back. If, my joking example about going to Vegas, if they're going to go to Vegas and put it all on black, that probably doesn't make sense, to do that refinance. And so again, it's back to the consultation that a loan officer has with that customer, and figuring out the ins and outs and giving them the information and letting them make an educated decision on it.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally makes sense. And then, so to add to that question, then let's say like we are refinancing, we're looking at refinancing. For somebody who has a MSHDA, what tends to be great options for refinancing in terms of FHA, conventional, or that, or it doesn't matter, or kind of what do you see tends to work out best for some of your MSHDA clients who may be looking to refinance?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. And this is very general. I mean, don't apply this.
Right.
This isn't a blanket answer, right? So, and it goes back to, I mean, I'm a firm believer, whether somebody's buying a house or refinancing, it's me sitting down with them, figuring out their wants, needs, desires, like their goals, like their financial picture, and helping them figure out the best option, And so same thing when I answer your question, it does vary a lot. Right. Generally speaking, because people have so much equity in their house right now, in most cases, we're trying to refinance them into a conventional loan, because most buyers that take a MSHDA, and again, this is a very blanket statement, but most of the time when we're doing MSHDA, it tends to be an FHA MSHDA. It's usually people with a little bit weaker credit that don't quite fit in that conventional box. Well, that's when they bought the house, their typical first time home buyer, just getting rolling, or had some credit issues, and they're just kind of coming out of that. They don't have a lot of money to put down, and we're doing an FHA MSHDA because they're lenient on credit. Absolutely. And, we don't need any down payment. So that's typically that. Historically, I would say that's typically the buyer that bought using a MSHDA loan. So fast forward, they're coming to refinance it. Now they've had a mortgage for a little while. That's been reporting on the credit. The credit's getting in a little bit better shape. A few years have gone by, the market's way up, they have equity in the house now. And so typically I'm trying to refinance them into a conventional because it's going to save them on the mortgage insurance is what it comes down to.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So the biggest thing that I'm hoping everybody takes away from this, I'm taking away from this is obviously that we need to make sure that we're having a loan consultation, that we're sitting down with a lender to figure out, I mean, it's great to watch this video, get a little bit of information, but at the end of the day, we need to figure out the right solution for us because there's no one size fits all. And so which leads me into the next thing is basically is how can somebody get in touch with you if they're looking to refinance or even just looking at another mortgage or to purchase a home so that they can sit down with you for a loan consultation, whether that's a phone number, email, website, just ways that people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, sure. We could probably throw some links around too, but best way to get a hold of me or look me up or get my info or whatever is my website, firstclassmortgageservice.com. It's firstclassmortgageservice.com. My phone number, email, all that stuff, all the ways to get a hold of me are right there on my website.
Perfect. Yeah, well, I'll have links at the bottom here in the description and everything for people to visit and get in touch with you. So that is all I had. Is there anything else that any closing thoughts that you want to make before we end this video?
Man, you summed it up perfect, Alex. I mean, everybody's situation's different. Everybody needs to sit down with a mortgage pro and a real estate pro and to help them figure out what works for their situation. I think that's key. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me.